How's life regression and past life therapy? This is where you take people back into their other lifetimes to find answers to problems. Many times, people have been going to doctors and psychiatrists. They've had problems all their lives and cannot find answers for them. They're at their wits' end, and I guess then we become the last resort when they want to come to a past life therapist. This is prohibited because doctors are surely not going to encourage them, especially the psychiatrist, to choose this route. But most of the time, the reasons why they can't find answers is because they're focusing on this life. After years of trying, the answers are not in this life because with reincarnation, we come back together again. Many things that happen to us in other lives are carried over into this life. We can have overlays, residual effects, things that carry over, deposited into this life, creating problems from another lifetime. This can be very traumatic for the subconscious mind and carry over into this life, like phobias, allergies. It would be easy to understand if you have a fear of water, fear of heights, fear of fire. You can see that you could relate back to the way the person died in another lifetime, and it causes the trauma to continue into this one. These are what I work with because I've found that the answers are there. I've found a whole lot of things that most people don't even realize. Let me go back to the beginning and explain how I got into this. I actually got involved in hypnosis 40 years ago, in the late 1960s. A long time ago. In those days, it was what was called normal hypnosis. I was involved in helping people quit smoking, lose weight, the normal use of hypnosis. My husband was helping me at that time, and we were working on these things together. At that time, there were no books written on past life therapy, it was just hypnosis. My husband was in the Navy, and we were stationed in Texas. He had been in the Navy for 21 years, including service in Vietnam. He had just been back for a year or so. He was there at the beginning of the Vietnam War, one of the first aircraft carriers to go over. So he was there at the beginning, working as a radar controller for the aircraft carriers. He came back, and we were stationed in Texas, trying to get our lives back to normal after that. He knew what I was doing with ordinary hypnosis, and sometimes he would help me with these. But, as I said, I was doing normal hypnosis, and the doctor had a patient who was a Navy wife struggling with weight issues due to overeating. The doctor thought that if we could get her to relax through hypnosis, it might help her more than the medication she was on. So, that's what we were going to try to do. Everything got strange, and it was totally unexpected. As we were working with her, we decided to take her back into her childhood to find out the cause of why she wanted to overeat. This is when everything changed. She suddenly jumped into a past life, in Chicago during the Roaring '20s, where she was a flapper living with gangsters. We were bewildered because she definitely wasn't alive in those times. This was the first adventure and the first time we had been exposed to something like this. I had always been interested in the paranormal most of my life, knowing it existed, but I never really read a lot about it or been exposed to it, I guess because in those days, there wasn't much information available. There were no books to help a hypnotist if they got into a situation where the patient went back into a past life. There were no instructions at all. The only book at that time was The Search for Bridie Murphy, which seemed ordinary compared to what has been discovered since. In the 1960s, it was groundbreaking that someone had reported going back into past lives with hypnosis, but that was the only book related to what we were doing at the time. Otherwise, we were more or less on our own. In those days, the methods of hypnosis were shuffled and complicated, and we had to use methods like the shiny object, where you would hang something shiny in front of the person, have them watch it until their eyes got tired, and then do long, drawn-out inductions, relaxing the person from the big toe up to their body. There was a lot of testing to see what level of trance the person was in, which took a lot of time. I hope it isn't done anymore because there are easier and simpler ways of doing this now. I speak before boards of psychiatrists and hypnotists, and I teach my classes. I still find people using these old methods, which is surprising. Now, going back to our patient, we kept taking her back again and again to see where she was going. Incidentally, she was helped with her weight and kidney problem, and we wanted to keep seeing where she was going. So she ended up going through 5 different lifetimes in many different places. It wasn't just Chicago, she ended up in Germany, living in a castle, and in Ireland as an ordinary housewife married to a shoemaker. She went back to where she was created by God, and it was an incredible experience. We had no background in any of this, and it was totally unexpected. We had no instructions, so we were just writing our own rules as we went along. All of this was recorded on the portable tape recorder of the day. Those familiar with it will remember the portable tape recorder with 8 to 10 big wheels of tape that had to be put on. It was very heavy and hard to lift and carry around, but we had it set up in our house. Many people on the base knew what we were doing, and they became interested in it. We protected the woman's identity because it was so strange, and we didn't want to affect her or her husband as naval personnel. When they found out what we were doing, they would come to our house once a week, and we would play the recordings for them. Everybody was astounded and fascinated, and they wanted to do what we were doing. Then came a disaster that changed our lives forever. As I mentioned, my husband had just come back from Vietnam and was almost killed in a horrible car accident. He was hit head-on on the highway by a construction officer who had been drinking at the old club on the base. He was driving a Volkswagen bus, and my husband was just ground into the wreckage because there's no motor in the front of those cars. The only thing that saved his life that night was because there was a Navy corpsman behind him who had just returned from Vietnam and knew all about emergency treatment. Otherwise, he might have died right there, but the corpsman was able to save his life until the helicopters came from the base. They had fire trucks and tried to get him out of the wreckage. He lost all the blood in his body, but they managed to get him to the base. They had to put him on old blood because it was the universal donor, needed to replace all the blood in his body. He spent a month in intensive care, in and out of consciousness, most of the time not even knowing where he was. He had some brain concussion, and his face was torn up. It was a horrible accident. They came and got me, and I went to the hospital. 5 different doctors gave different reasons why there was no way he could possibly live through the night because it was too severe, too much trauma. When I worked with hypnosis and experienced it, there was nothing about waterberry fermentation. We took her into the future to see what we would be doing. Well, she saw us living in the country and with grandchildren, which we didn't have at that time. We had a big family, but none of them were married yet, and she was the tallest. That night, all the different things that could kill my husband, I couldn't believe it because I knew we had stumbled onto something so big and important. I had to relieve it, even though it was strange. If I had to believe it, I had to believe it all. She told us the way God really was and how He was love. He was not going to die that night. How could he die if she saw him in the future? So, as each one of them was telling me what was going to happen, I told them no. He's not, he's going to be all right. Maybe it'll happen, maybe it'll be all right. Johnny was in the intensive care for a month, in and out of consciousness. After that, he was in a body cast for 8 months. For most of the year, he spent in the hospital, in a body cast where he couldn't move. I can't even imagine how awful that must have been, not being able to move. They kept calling him the miracle because they said there was no way he could have gotten through all of this. The important part of all of this that I usually like people to know is that the people on the base knew what we were doing. They kept saying this was our punishment, God punishing us for peering around corners into the unknown and for delving into reincarnation, considered the work of the devil. So, this was God's way of punishing us. Of course, I can only shake my head if they're ignorant, but I could not believe that. I knew God as a loving force, not a punisher. Questions and wanting to find that just wasn't the way the God that I knew would act. I couldn't believe that what was happening to us, horrible as it was punishment by any creator. After a year in the hospital, he was put out of the Navy as a disabled veteran. We had to go somewhere, so we moved into the country, into the hills of Arkansas. We had a big family, and we had to go somewhere where we could live with little money. He spent 25 years in a wheelchair. He could get outside with crutches and drive a hand control car, but the rest of his life, he was disabled. Of course, he rebuilt his life. He became the Veterans Service Officer for the county and was very active in ham radio. But our whole world was turned upside down. Now, I'm glad that we live in the country because I travel all over the world and I'm in these cities in all of traffic. I don't like that anymore. I like to get back here where I can recharge my battery by being out in the country, away from those discordant surroundings. I can rebuild myself and recharge my battery. It turned out to be a very perfect place to live, but in the beginning, we didn't know that. We just moved without having to spend a lot of money. All of my work with hypnosis and traveling back into the past had done something to me. It had planted something there that I would never forget, that I wanted.